Welcome to Scoli Sleep Stories. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let the day soften around you, and settle in for a calm documentary made for curious minds. If these stories help you rest, learn, or simply enjoy a quieter part of the day, please consider liking this episode and subscribing to the channel. Now, when you are ready, let us begin. Chapter 1. Beneath a Canopy of Rain. Evening rain has settled gently over the street. It falls steadily, though not heavily, making a soft pattern upon windows, rooftops, and the dark leaves of roadside trees. Along the pavement, shallow reflections gather beneath the lamps. Their warm circles of light tremble whenever a drop touches the water. Above you curves the canopy of an umbrella. Seen from below, it is almost like a small room carried through the open air. The fabric forms a quiet ceiling. Beyond its edge, rain descends in silver threads. Drops patter against the canopy, travel down its sloping surface, and gather briefly along the rim before falling away. The umbrella is so familiar that it is easy to overlook its careful design. It waits in a stand beside a door, rests in the corner of a shop, or travels folded inside a bag. Then clouds arrive, the umbrella opens, and a little shelter appears. Yet this ordinary companion has a history reaching thousands of years into the past. There was no single moment when the umbrella was invented. No securely identified craftsperson can be named as its first maker, and no one place can be declared with certainty as its birthplace. Instead, portable sunshades and ceremonial canopies appeared across several ancient societies. Some may have developed independently. Others may have passed from one region to another through trade, migration, diplomacy, and the patient exchange of ideas. The story of the umbrella is therefore not the story of one sudden invention. It is a gradual history of shade and shelter, ceremony and craftsmanship, and many people making small improvements over long stretches of time. For now, beneath this evening canopy, we can begin with the modern umbrella held in your hand. At its center is a long, narrow shaft. This is the main support, running from the handle to the top of the umbrella. Around it is a frame made from slender ribs. These ribs spread outward beneath the fabric, giving the canopy its familiar rounded form. Each rib is joined to another narrow piece called a stretcher. The stretchers connect the ribs to a small sliding part fitted around the central shaft. This sliding part is known as the runner. When the runner moves upward, it pushes the stretchers outward. The stretchers in turn lift and spread the ribs. The folded fabric expands into a broad canopy, and the frame settles into place. With one smooth movement, something narrow enough to carry becomes wide enough to shelter a person. When the runner moves downward again, the process reverses. The stretchers draw inward. The ribs fold toward the shaft, and the canopy gathers into soft pleats. It is a simple arrangement to use, though it was not a simple arrangement to perfect. Every joint must move as intended. Every rib must open to the proper distance. The covering must remain loose enough to fold, yet tight enough to form a useful surface when opened. The domed shape is especially important. A flat covering might allow rainwater to collect in the middle. The gentle slope of an umbrella guides the water outward instead. Drops run toward the edge, leaving the center clear. In this way, the umbrella behaves like a very small roof, one that does not belong to a house, but travels wherever its holder goes. Such a movable roof seems naturally suited to rain. For much of history, however, umbrella-like shelters were connected more closely with sunlight. In warm regions, shade could be valuable in its own right. A broad covering made from cloth, leaves, leather, paper, feathers, or other available materials could soften the brightness of the day. Beneath it was a circle of shelter, separated from the open sky. Long before lightweight waterproof fabrics were available, making shade was often easier than making a portable covering able to resist steady rain. These early sunshades were not always everyday possessions. Many were large and elaborate. Some had to be carried by an attendant. They appeared above rulers, nobles, religious figures, and sacred objects. Their purpose was partly practical, but it was also symbolic. To stand beneath a special canopy was to be set apart from the surrounding crowd. The shade itself could become a sign of dignity, honor, sacred importance, or authority. An object that protected someone from the sun could also show that the protected person held a particular place in society. Modern umbrellas descend from both sides of this long tradition. They belong to the practical history of shelter from the weather, but they also inherit the form of ceremonial canopies once held above important people and sacred objects. Even the language remembers the ancient importance of shade. The English word umbrella ultimately comes from the Latin word umbra, meaning shade or shadow. Its linguistic ancestry points not toward rain, but toward protection from sunlight. The word parasol likewise refers to guarding against the sun. In its usual modern sense, a parasol is a light, portable shade used for protection on a bright day. Today, people often make a neat distinction between the two words. A parasol keeps off sunlight, an umbrella keeps off rain. History is less tidy. The distinction is relatively modern, and it has never been perfect. A covering made for shade might also turn aside a brief shower. A rain umbrella might offer welcome shelter on a bright afternoon. The same object could serve both purposes, depending upon its material, its owner, and the weather passing overhead. The names may differ, but the central idea remains wonderfully consistent. It is a canopy that can be carried. Over the centuries, that idea changed slowly. A canopy that once stood fixed over a seat or platform became portable. A portable shade gained a frame that could close. Craftspeople experimented with coverings that resisted water. Heavy supports gave way to lighter ribs. Hand production was joined by mechanized production. Shafts learned to telescope, sliding inward to form shorter lengths. Springs and buttons eventually allowed some umbrellas to open automatically. No single stage created the umbrella we know today. Each contributed one part. Its history resembles the opening of the object itself. One piece moves, and then another. The runner rises. The ribs spread. At last the whole form becomes visible. On the rain-darkened street, these ancient beginnings are hidden within an everyday gesture. A hand holds a curved handle. The shaft leans slightly toward the falling drops. Water travels quietly over the canopy and disappears beyond its edge. Around you, the city continues beneath many small circles of shelter. Some umbrellas are black or gray, others are blue, red, yellow, or clear. Their owners pass one another along the shining pavement, each carrying a private roof through the shared rain. They may seem far removed from the canopies of ancient ports and sacred ceremonies, yet the resemblance remains. There is still a central support. There is still a surface held overhead. There is still a sheltered space beneath it. Only the meaning has changed. What was once rare has become ordinary. What once marked rank may now hang beside almost any doorway. A form associated with rulers and ceremony has become a companion for commuters, market visitors, school children, gardeners, travelers, and anyone who notices clouds gathering above a familiar road. There is something quietly reassuring in this change. An old idea, once formal and exceptional, has become part of daily life. The small roof opens without ceremony. It asks for no special occasion. It simply offers shade or turns aside the rain, creating a modest space in which to continue the journey. The shower keeps its even, unhurried rhythm. Near the curb, water follows a narrow channel toward a drain. Beneath an awning, a shopkeeper turns a sign toward the window. Farther along, someone pauses to close an umbrella before entering a warmly lit doorway. The runner slides downward, the ribs fold inward, and the little roof becomes a slender bundle once more. To follow the umbrella backward through time is to leave this evening street gradually, rather than all at once. The paved road gives way to an older path. Electric lamps fade into sunlight. Modern waterproof cloth becomes woven fabric, leather, leaves, paper, and feathers. The compact frame grows larger and more formal. The hand holding the shelter is no longer necessarily the hand of the person beneath it. The calm sound of rain gives way to the stillness of a bright and distant day. The umbrella is not yet the common object waiting beside a doorway. It is a sunshade, a canopy, and a visible sign carried high above the ground. Under an ancient sky, an attendant walks at a measured pace. Raised above a person of importance is a broad canopy, carefully made and clearly seen. It offers a pool of shade beneath the sunlight, and it offers something more as well. It is a quiet sign of honor, carried through the light. Chapter 2. Ancient Shade and Ceremony. The attendant walks at a measured pace, beneath a bright and open sky. In both hands perhaps rests a long wooden staff. Above it spreads a broad canopy, casting a calm circle of shade over the important figure nearby. The sunshade is practical. It softens the strong light and creates a cooler space in which to walk. Yet everyone who sees it understands another meaning as well. This is not merely shade. It is distinction made visible. Some of the earliest known images of portable sunshades come from ancient Egypt. By the 3rd millennium BCE, artists were already depicting forms that resemble parasols or canopies. These representations belong especially to royal and elite settings. They appear in a world of palaces, temples, formal journeys, and carefully arranged ceremonies, where the placement of each person and object could carry meaning. In Egypt, shelter from the sun had an obvious value. Across open courtyards and beside pale stone walls, the light could be intense. A patch of shade was no small comfort. It created a gentler boundary between the body and the warmth of the day. But a sunshade carried above someone by an attendant did more than soften the sunlight. It announced that the sheltered person occupied a special place. Most people moved beneath the open sky. A ruler or another high-ranking figure might travel beneath a private canopy. Shade itself became part of the language of rank. Much of what we know about these early objects comes from images. Painted scenes, carved surfaces, reliefs, and surviving decorative works reveal the outlines of canopies and the long poles that supported them. They show how a shade was carried, where it appeared within a procession, who stood beneath it, and who held it aloft. Yet images cannot answer every question. The organic materials of daily life rarely survive well across thousands of years. Cloth decays, leather dries and breaks apart, wood can be consumed by moisture, insects, or time. Woven reeds and leaves return quietly to the earth. Feathers separate and scatter. Although the dry conditions of Egypt preserved many remarkable objects, most ancient sunshades have not reached the present complete and unchanged. For that reason, it is wise to be cautious when imagining exactly how every canopy was made. Depending on its place and period, a sunshade may have included a wooden pole, a woven covering, cloth, leather, plant matter, or feathers. Some may have been rigid rather than folding. Some may have appeared only during ceremonies, and although they provided welcome shade, they should not automatically be thought of as waterproof. A modern umbrella is so familiar that it is easy to place its features upon every older object. We may imagine sliding mechanisms, hinged ribs, and a canopy that opens and closes with a practiced movement. But not every ancient canopy folded like a modern umbrella. Some may have remained open, more like small roofs carried from place to place. Others may have been taken apart or stored in ways that no surviving picture explains. The strongest evidence is often the simplest. An image can tell us that a canopy existed, that it was held above an important person, and that it formed part of an ordered scene. It is less likely to reveal the texture of a vanished cloth, the treatment applied to leather, or the hidden structure beneath a decorative covering. Form and symbolism remain visible. Materials and mechanisms are more elusive. One especially graceful surviving Egyptian object is a wooden sunshade shaped like a lotus. The lotus was a familiar and meaningful form in Egyptian art, rising from water and opening toward the light. A lotus-shaped shade joined decoration with practical shelter. It shows that Egyptian craftspeople experimented with shade structures as objects of beauty, not merely as ordinary equipment. We might picture its smooth wooden surfaces and flower-like form, held above a sunlit court. Precisely how such an object was used may not always be certain. Still, it offers a quiet reminder that the wish for shelter has long invited artistry. Even a useful object can become a symbol, and even a symbol must be shaped, balanced, carried, and made by human hands. East of Egypt, in the lands of Mesopotamia, royal sunshades also appeared in ancient art. Later Assyrian artists left especially clear scenes. In palace reliefs from the Neo-Assyrian period, roughly the 9th through the 7th centuries BCE, attendants are shown holding parasols above kings. These reliefs were carved into stone panels associated with important palace rooms. Their surfaces preserve formal processions, court rituals, gardens, trees, chariots, attendants, and rulers. Folds of clothing, carefully arranged hair, patterned surfaces, and upright staffs were rendered with close attention. Among these many details, the royal parasol rises with unmistakable clarity. Its canopy forms a firm and ordered shape above the ruler. Decorative edges may emphasize its outline. A long pole connects the canopy to the attendant, whose position is carefully arranged in relation to the king. The parasol does not drift casually through the scene. It belongs to the structure of court life. By placing a canopy above the ruler, the image separates him visually from the people nearby. His position can be recognized at once. He occupies the sheltered center, while the attendants stand in measured relation to him. The person carrying the parasol therefore performs an important ceremonial role. The attendant supports a physical object, but also helps maintain the visible order of the court. Canopy, bearer, and ruler form a composed group. The shade is part of a larger display of dignity and authority. These Assyrian parasols are best understood chiefly as royal sunshades and insignia. They displayed position and marked the ruler within a formal scene. They were not necessarily ordinary rain umbrellas carried through busy streets. In the surviving images, their purpose is elevated and ceremonial. They shelter, frame, and identify the king. It is possible that some materials could resist a little moisture, yet the reliefs themselves do not prove that these parasols were designed for rain. Their clearest message concerns protection from sunlight along with rank, ceremony, and the careful organization of royal life. The stone remains still, even when the scene depicts movement. An attendant steps forward. A king stands or proceeds beneath the canopy. Garments fall in carved lines. The parasol stays poised above them, fixed now in the cool permanence of the palace wall. Farther east, parasols also became part of the visual traditions of ancient Persia. In relief sculpture connected with imperial courts, royal figures appear within carefully ordered settings. Here again, a parasol could mark the elevated position of a ruler. Persian court imagery often communicates through arrangement. The height of a figure, the direction in which others face, and the placement of staffs, garments, steps, and platforms all contribute to a composed image of authority. Within such a setting, a parasol creates a distinct enclosure of honor. It offers protection while also showing that the protected person stands apart. As in Egypt and Assyria, the clearest Persian evidence concerns royal and ceremonial use. It is much more difficult to reconstruct what the wider population may have carried in everyday life. Ordinary shelters made from perishable local materials would have been less likely to appear in imperial art, and still less likely to survive for thousands of years. This uneven evidence encourages patience. History often preserves the exceptional object and loses the commonplace one. Stone remembers a royal procession more readily than a woven shade used beside a field. A carved wall may keep the clear outline of a ruler's parasol, while leaving no trace of a simple canopy once raised in a market or along a road. The absence of such everyday objects does not tell us exactly what ordinary people did or did not use. It simply marks the limit of the evidence. We can speak with greater confidence about the royal canopies shown in art. Beyond those images, we must move more gently. Nor can Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, China, or any other single ancient region be confidently named as the sole inventor of the umbrella. Portable shades appeared in several cultures, and the surviving evidence does not establish one confirmed point of origin. Similar needs can guide people in distant places towards similar ideas. Where sunlight was strong, a raised covering offered practical relief. Where ceremony required a visible sign of dignity, a canopy made rank easy to recognize. The same object could provide physical shade and carry a social meaning. Its usefulness and symbolism rested together beneath one broad form. Across these early cultures, then, the parasol was more than an ancestor of the umbrella in shape alone. It expressed an enduring human idea. Shelter could be carried. A small boundary of shade could move with a person through the world. In the bright Egyptian courtyard, a canopy softened the sun. On an Assyrian palace wall, it held its form above a carved king. In Persian court imagery, it became part of a balanced language of protection and rank. Wood, cloth, leather, woven material, plant matter, and feathers have mostly vanished, but outlines remain in painted scenes and enduring stone. Those outlines do not tell us everything. They do not always reveal a hinge, a rib, a joint, or the treatment placed upon a surface. They cannot show whether a canopy folded, remained open, or was dismantled after a procession. Yet they preserve the beginning of a long relationship between shelter, ceremony, and craft. The early parasol made a quiet space beneath the brightness. It marked one person within a carefully ordered gathering. It required a maker to shape it and an attendant to bear it. In doing so, it joined practical comfort with visible meaning. From these firm ceremonial canopies, the story now turns farther east. The carved stone grows still behind us, and lighter materials begin to enter the story. In workshops shaped by other traditions, bamboo could provide strength without excessive weight. Silk and paper could spread across delicate frameworks. Careful construction could make portable shelter more mechanically intricate. The ancient canopy, once held steadily above rulers, was ready to change. Its broad shade would meet new materials, new methods, and new forms. And little by little, the portable shelter would begin to open and fold, drawing closer to the familiar umbrella carried today. Chapter 3. Umbrellas in Early China. From the ceremonial canopies of the ancient Near East, the story moves eastward across mountains, grasslands, and river valleys toward early China. Here, evidence survives in images, written accounts, and made objects. Together, these traces reveal a tradition of portable shade, carriage canopies, and intricate frames. One of the most striking examples comes from the vast tomb complex of the first Qin emperor, who ruled in the 3rd century BCE. Among the objects buried near his tomb were 2 bronze model chariots, fashioned with extraordinary attention to detail. Their horses, drivers, harnesses, wheels, and fittings were reproduced in metal, and above each carriage rises a prominent umbrella-like canopy. These were not small hand umbrellas of the kind carried along a modern street. They formed part of the chariots, providing shade while expressing the dignity of the person beneath. Their broad, rounded forms suggest protection as well as status. Other archaeological finds and surviving representations associate umbrella-like canopies with chariots and elite life. This early evidence shows that skilled makers could support a wide covering on a central pole and secure it to a moving vehicle. The evidence becomes especially interesting when the canopy begins to fold. A Chinese written source from 21 CE, during the time of Wang Mang, describes a collapsible canopy associated with a carriage. Often cited as an early record of a folding or articulated umbrella, it offers no complete workshop. Chapter 4. Monsoon Skies of South and Southeast Asia. Beyond the quiet courtyard, the roads continue into landscapes shaped by strong sunlight and returning rain. They pass through fields beneath open skies, towns gathered beside rivers, and temple grounds where broad leaves hold clear drops after a shower. In these warm regions, portable shelter has long answered 2 familiar needs. A canopy could soften the brightness of the sun. When seasonal rain arrived, that same shelter could turn the falling water aside. Yet in South Asia, the parasol was never only an article of weather protection. It could carry meanings far greater than its size might suggest. An important Sanskrit term is chhatra, sometimes written chakra. It refers to a parasol associated with royalty, sovereignty, protection, and sacred honor. The word should not be applied to every umbrella found across South and Southeast Asia. These broad regions contain many languages, customs, and distinct traditions. Still, the chhatra offers a path toward understanding how a simple canopy could become a powerful sign of dignity. To stand beneath a ceremonial parasol was to be visibly set apart. Its shelter suggested more than shade. It expressed the idea that the person, object, or sacred presence below deserved reverence and care. Above a ruler, it could represent sovereign authority. Within Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions, it could express spiritual importance, protection, and religious honor. This symbolism appears with remarkable clarity at the Great Stupa at Sanchi in central India. The stupa is a rounded Buddhist monument, built to enshrine sacred relics and serve as a focus for devotion. Its broad stone dome rises from the earth with a calm and balanced form. Above the dome stands a square enclosure. Higher still, umbrella-like stone elements are arranged upon a central support. These stone parasols do not open or close. They do not turn rain away from a traveler. Their purpose is symbolic. Raised above the dome, they represent dignity, spiritual authority, and honor. The familiar form of a portable parasol has been translated into architecture, becoming part of an enduring monument. In some early Buddhist art, the Buddha was not depicted directly in human form. His presence or importance could instead be suggested through symbols, including an empty throne, a wheel, footprints, a sacred tree, or a parasol. To viewers who understood this visual language, the canopy could indicate that someone of the highest spiritual significance was present, even when no human figure appeared beneath it. A single parasol could convey honor. Several parasols arranged in tiers could increase the sense of ceremonial significance. One canopy rose above another, forming a gentle vertical rhythm against the sky. A higher or more elaborate arrangement might communicate greater rank or sacred dignity. The meaning of a particular number of tiers, however, was not universal. It varied between places and periods, shaped by local court customs, religious traditions, and systems of status. A number meaningful in one setting could not automatically be interpreted in the same way elsewhere. Beyond monuments and processions, ordinary weather continued through its yearly cycle. Across much of South Asia, intervals of intense sunlight were followed by seasonal monsoon rain. The monsoon formed a recurring rhythm within the landscape. Clouds gathered over familiar horizons. Rain darkened stone pathways and refreshed the fields. Courtyard trees gleamed, and water collected briefly along the edges of tiled roofs. Under such skies, portable shade and rain cover were naturally useful. A traveler crossing an open road could welcome a broad canopy. A merchant seated beside goods in a market might value its shade through the bright hours. Someone walking between houses, shrines, and workshops could carry a small shelter overhead when rain began to patter upon the ground. The details of these everyday umbrellas are not always easy to recover. Cloth, paper, bamboo, cane, wood, and cord can decay, especially in warm and humid conditions. Ceremonial parasols carved in stone, fashioned from durable materials, or painted within protected buildings are more likely to survive than a modest umbrella carried until its covering wore thin. As a result, art and architecture preserve evidence of ceremony more readily than evidence of ordinary use. This uneven survival can make the past seem filled with royal processions and sacred monuments, while everyday streets remain comparatively quiet. Yet practical umbrellas existed in many settings. Their exact timelines are simply difficult to establish. A useful household object might be repaired again and again, passed from one owner to another, and finally disappear without leaving a written record. Its shade may have been welcomed for many years, even though the object itself left no lasting trace. Ideas associated with royal and sacred parasols traveled from the Indian subcontinent into Sri Lanka and across Southeast Asia. They moved with religious teachings, diplomatic customs, trade, migration, and courtly art. But they did not travel as one fixed and unchanging design. In every region, local makers and communities interpreted the parasol through their own skills, materials, colors, and systems of meaning. In Sri Lanka, parasols became part of ceremonial and religious life. They appeared in settings where honor was shown to sacred objects, monks, or important participants. Across mainland Southeast Asia, tiered umbrellas also entered the visual language of royal courts and temples. They appeared in Thailand, Cambodia, and Myanmar, sometimes standing above thrones or sacred spaces, and sometimes carried in formal processions. In Thailand, the white tiered royal umbrella became a particularly important emblem of sovereign authority. Its pale surfaces and carefully arranged levels created an impression of order and distinction. In Thai traditions, a number of tiers could indicate rank or status. Such umbrellas belonged to an established ceremonial system. They were not simply enlarged versions of the practical shade carried along a road. A royal umbrella might remain poised above a throne, or appear in a ceremony where every object had an appointed place. Its shaft, canopy, color, and number of levels all contributed to its meaning. Seen from across a courtyard, the white tiers seemed to float one above another, narrowing gently toward the top. Their shelter was symbolic as well as physical. They made authority visible beneath the open sky. In Cambodia, tiered parasols likewise became part of royal and religious traditions. Their forms developed alongside local architecture and court ceremony. Near temple buildings, the upward repetition of each canopy could accompany the rising forms of rooflines, towers, and carved ornament, leading the gaze from the courtyard toward the sky. Myanmar developed its own rich traditions. There, parasols were historically associated with royalty, monks, and public expressions of honor. A parasol held above a respected figure did not merely keep away the sunlight. It marked regard and created a small, moving space of dignity. Myanmar also became known for parasols made for decoration and daily use. Pathane gained particular renown for handmade Burmese parasols. Within a workshop, pieces of wood or bamboo could be cut and shaped into a light framework. Slender ribs spread outward from the shaft, supporting a canopy of decorative paper or cloth. The making required patience and careful coordination. The frame had to open evenly. Each rib needed to meet the canopy at the proper place, allowing the surface to remain balanced rather than pulling toward one side. Paper or fabric might be decorated with flowers, leaves, geometric borders, or broad fields of color. When the work was complete, the open parasols could be placed in rows to dry. In warm daylight, such a row forms a quiet garden of circles. One canopy may be red, another gold, another green or cream. Painted petals rest upon paper surfaces, while wooden handles point toward the ground. A faint current of air passes along the row, barely lifting the edges. Around the workshop, broad leaves shine after rain, and small drops fall at measured intervals from the eaves. These Pathane parasols belong to a distinct regional craft tradition. They are not merely distant designs copied without change. The same is true across Southeast Asia. Local makers adapted umbrella forms to their own surroundings. They worked with available woods, bamboo, paper, cloth, pigments, oils, and varnishes, according to local knowledge and purpose. They adjusted the width of a canopy, the length of a handle, and the curve of a rib. They chose colors and patterns suited to local tastes. They made umbrellas for ceremonies, monasteries, markets, gardens, and homes. Some forms emphasized rich ornament and symbolic meaning. Others were simpler and more practical. A ceremonial parasol might be too delicate, too large, or too important for use in ordinary rain. A workaday umbrella, by contrast, might carry little decoration and receive frequent repairs. Sacred parasols should not be reduced to weather equipment, just as practical umbrellas should not be overlooked because fewer of them survived. Together, these different forms reveal variations on one quiet idea. A canopy held above a person or place can offer protection, distinction, and a feeling of enclosure. Sometimes the protection is from sunlight, sometimes it is from rain, sometimes it is symbolic, suggesting that whatever rests beneath the canopy is worthy of attention and care. Across South and Southeast Asia, the parasol took on many names, shapes, colors, and meanings. It stood above stone monuments and royal seats. It accompanied monks and formal processions. It shaded travelers, householders, and places of work. It opened in temple courtyards and dried beside workshop walls. No single design, tier count, material, or meaning can represent all these traditions. The term chhatra illuminates one important history, but it does not describe every regional umbrella. The white tiers of a royal emblem, the stone parasols above a stupa, and the painted paper canopy in a workshop each belong to their own setting. Their variety is an essential part of their story. As the seasonal rain passes, water slips softly from the edges of tiled roofs. White tiered umbrellas remain poised above temple steps and royal spaces, while painted parasols brighten the courtyards of craftspeople. Some offer practical shelter. Others express honor that no ordinary rain cover could convey. From here, the route turns gradually westward, crossing lands and seas toward the Mediterranean. There, beneath a bright and often drier sky, smaller handheld sunshades would accompany leisurely walks and offer their own circles of welcome shade. Chapter 5: Greece, Rome, and the Mediterranean Sun. Along the shores of the Mediterranean, the light has a particular clarity. It rests upon pale stone walls, brightens the leaves of olive trees, and gathers on the broad steps of temples and public buildings. During the warmest hours, narrow bands of shadow lie beneath long colonnades. Gardens offer the cooler shelter of leaves and branches. Wherever people cross an open courtyard or walk along an exposed road, shade becomes something to notice, seek, and value. Into this sunlit landscape came the portable parasol. The ancient Greeks knew a shade-giving object called the skiadion. Its name was connected with shadow or shade, and it referred to a canopy that could be carried above the head. Its exact form was not always described in detail, and surviving images must be interpreted with care. Even so, references in Greek art and writing show that portable sunshades were familiar enough to hold a recognizable place in public life. By the late 5th century BCE, The parasol was associated particularly with fashionable or affluent women. A woman walking outdoors might be accompanied by an attendant who held the shade above her. Cloth stretched over a light frame would create a small moving circle of shelter. As the two figures crossed a courtyard or passed between pale stone buildings, the canopy would tilt and shift with the direction of the sun. Its purpose was practical. Mediterranean sunlight could be strong, especially in open civic spaces where stone reflected heat and brightness. A portable shade made a walk more comfortable. Yet the parasol also communicated something about the person beneath it. Fine cloth, a carefully made frame, and the presence of an attendant suggested a household with resources. Being able to avoid the sun displayed a degree of leisure. Having another person carry the shade made that position even more visible. This does not mean that every Greek woman used a parasol, or that such an object was standard equipment for every citizen. The surviving evidence points more often toward wealth, ceremony, and cultivated appearance than toward universal daily use. Parasols belong to a particular language of public display. Clothing, jewelry, attendants, and portable shade could all indicate a person's place within society. Greek art sometimes presents parasols in shapes that seem familiar even now. There may be a central pole, a rounded or gently conical cover, and edges extending outward to block the light. Ancient artists, however, were not making technical diagrams. A painted vessel or carved image might simplify the construction, alter its proportions, or use the parasol as a recognizable symbol. What can be seen most clearly is the central idea. A held canopy created shade for the person walking below. In certain Greek festivals, parasols also had ceremonial roles, carried in a formal procession. A sunshade became more than a response to heat. It joined an ordered arrangement of special clothing, offerings, and carefully observed movement. The person carrying it, the person beneath it, and the route of the procession could all contribute to its meaning. Such ceremonial use belonged to a much wider history. Across many ancient societies, a canopy could distinguish a ruler, a sacred figure, or an honored participant. The Greek parasol joined this older tradition, while also becoming connected with fashion and femininity. Its patch of shade was both physical and social. It was a cooler place beneath bright cloth and a visible sign of comfort and refinement. Rain was certainly known in Greece. Seasonal weather could darken stone streets and send water slipping from tiled roofs. Yet Mediterranean sunlight, rather than rain, dominates the surviving evidence for Greek parasols. There is not enough evidence to describe a portable rain umbrella as an ordinary possession carried throughout Greek towns. The object that appears most clearly is a sunshade. Across the sea and through the centuries, Roman society adopted and adapted many elements of Greek culture. The Romans used the terms umbraculum and umbella for shade-giving devices. These words are connected with the later language of umbrellas, although their ancient meanings could be broad. Depending on the context, a term might suggest a personal parasol, a larger canopy, or another arrangement intended to cast shade. Ancient vocabulary does not always fit neatly inside modern categories, so context remains important. Roman women of means used portable parasols, and servants might carry them. In gardens, along walkways, or at outdoor gatherings, a small canopy offered relief from the sun. One can picture dyed fabric moving quietly through a bright public space, its shadow gliding over the ground. A handle might be simple or decorative, while the cover could become part of a carefully chosen appearance. As in Greece, these objects were connected with wealth and leisure. Someone attending a social occasion, walking through a garden, or appearing at a public spectacle had opportunities to use a delicate parasol. Portable shade could therefore be coded by gender and social position. It belonged especially to an image of femininity shaped by fashion, comfort, and visible household standing. These meanings were neither permanent nor universal. Objects change as they pass between places and generations. Even so, the connection among parasols, women's fashion, and public elegance proved remarkably durable. Many centuries later, early modern European parasols would again appear in gardens and elegant public spaces, often as carefully selected accessories. The Roman image did not travel forward unchanged, but something of its social pattern would reappear. Outdoor Roman life also called for shade on a much larger scale. Public gatherings and spectacles could keep crowds seated beneath an open sky for long periods. At some Roman venues, large fabric awnings were raised above parts of the audience. Broad coverings allowed shade to reach many people at once, turning an exposed seating area into a more comfortable public space. A great awning and a personal parasol shared the purpose of creating shade, but they should remain distinct. One belonged to architecture and collective planning. The other could be held in the hand and moved with an individual. A large awning sheltered part of a crowd. A parasol formed a much smaller island of shadow, following one person through a garden, walkway, or gathering. Together they show an awareness of comfort in outdoor public life. Roman spaces could include covered walks, porticos, colonnades, and planted gardens. Buildings created permanent areas of shelter, while fabric offered something more flexible. A cloth covering could be raised where shade was wanted. And all these forms show how the Romans understood the balance between the practical and the social, then lowered or removed when it was no longer needed. Some Roman references suggest that portable coverings could offer protection from weather beyond sunlight. A canopy held above the head might provide a measure of shelter when the weather changed. Still, the evidence is limited. It does not support the claim that Romans invented the rain umbrella, nor does it show that personal rain umbrellas were everyday possessions throughout Roman society. The surviving picture is incomplete. Cloth and wooden frames rarely endure in the same way as stone monuments. A parasol carried through a garden might vanish without leaving a physical trace. Art may preserve a recognizable shape, while written references preserve a word or a passing observation. Historians must bring these scattered pieces together carefully, without making the picture more certain than the evidence allows. What emerges is a quiet but meaningful scene. Greek and Roman parasols were real and recognizable, but they were not universal. They belonged most clearly to sunlight, ceremony, fashion, wealth, and leisure. Beneath them walked people whose public appearance reflected household position and social custom. Around them stood pale columns and shaded porticos. Above them opened circles of cloth, each moving gently with the hand that carried it. The practical and symbolic purposes of the parasol were never far apart. It cooled the person below, while also marking that person out. It made shade, and it conveyed position. To walk beneath a canopy could suggest dignity, femininity, comfort, or honor. To have an attendant carry it added another layer of meaning. In time, the fabric wore away. Wooden shafts and light frames disappeared. The societies of Greece and Rome changed, and many of their buildings slowly weathered beneath the same Mediterranean sun. Yet the idea of the canopy endured. The small circles of shade began to widen in meaning. Beyond gardens, walkways, and public gatherings, canopies continued to appear in ceremonial life. They were raised above sacred objects, carried in processions, and held over seats of authority. A simple shelter from sunlight could become a sign of reverence and rank. And so, as the Mediterranean parasol passes onward, its circle of shade grows larger. It opens above formal processions and places of honor, carrying an ancient symbolism into later courts and sacred traditions. The cloth may change, and the hands holding it may belong to another age, but the canopy remains, poised gently above those whom a society wishes to shelter, distinguish, and honor. Chapter 6. Sacred and Royal Canopies. As the ancient Mediterranean world gradually gave way to new kingdoms, new courts, and new forms of worship, the portable parasol became less conspicuous in much of Western Europe. It did not vanish completely, and not every region followed the same path. Yet for many centuries, the sight of a person walking beneath a small, handheld shade was less familiar there than it had once been in parts of Greece and Rome. The broader idea of the canopy, however, endured. It appeared above thrones and altars, above sacred objects and honored people. It moved slowly through courtyards and along processional roads. Sometimes it was held aloft on several polished poles. Sometimes it stood permanently over a seat, shrine, or place of worship. Its fabric might be embroidered, fringed, or lined in a contrasting color. In candlelight, golden threads could catch the glow, while folds of cloth deepened into quiet shades of crimson, blue, and green. These canopies were not necessarily umbrellas in the mechanical sense. They did not always have a central shaft, radiating ribs, or a frame that opened and closed. Some were more like small roofs made of fabric. Others resembled pavilions, curtains, or richly decorated awnings. A fixed canopy over a throne or altar might be called a baldachin, although names and forms varied from place to place. It is helpful not to place all these objects in a single category. A pavilion is not simply a very large umbrella, and a baldachin is not merely an umbrella that cannot be folded. Yet they belong to the same broad visual family. Each creates a distinguished space beneath an overhead covering. The meaning is easy to understand, even across distant cultures. To place a canopy above someone is to draw the eye toward that person. The covering separates a small area from its ordinary surroundings. It suggests protection, dignity, and central importance. Beneath it, a ruler may appear more ruler-like, a throne more solemn, and a sacred object more visibly set apart. In a great hall, the seat beneath a canopy was not simply another chair. In a procession, the figure beneath embroidered cloth was not simply another person in the crowd. The covering made a frame in the air, as though a small part of the palace, or sanctuary, had become light enough to travel. This symbolism remained important in the Byzantine world, where the legacy of the Eastern Roman Empire continued through the medieval centuries. Court life developed elaborate ways of expressing rank and authority through clothing, color, position, and ceremony. Canopies and parasol-like forms could become part of this language of honor. Their meaning did not require a written explanation. Their position above a distinguished figure made their purpose visible. In parts of Eastern Christianity, canopies also retained ceremonial importance. During a procession, cloth held overhead could mark the presence of a holy object or a senior religious figure. The movement was measured and formal. Poles remained upright, and fabric rose above the gathering. Beneath it came vestments, lamps, incense, and carefully carried objects, proceeding under arches or across open squares. The exact routes by which imperial canopy symbolism entered particular church ceremonies are complex. Customs changed over long periods, and surviving evidence does not offer one simple account in which a single object passed unchanged from an ancient palace into a medieval church. Ceremonies borrowed, adapted, and reinterpreted familiar forms. A sign of royal distinction could become a sign of sacred honor, while a practical covering might acquire a meaning far beyond shelter. In Western Christianity, processional canopies also came to distinguish important people and sacred objects. Some were broad cloth coverings, supported at their corners. Others were smaller and more umbrella-like. A small white or gold umbrella, for example, could be carried above the Eucharist during a short procession. The Eucharist is the consecrated bread used in Christian worship and treated in Catholic tradition with profound reverence. The ceremonial umbrella carried above it was not ordinary rainwear. Its purpose was to create a visible shelter of honor, even if the procession traveled only a short distance. Its presence announced that what passed beneath it was sacred and central to the ceremony. Another distinctive Catholic object is the umbrellino, also known as the umbraculum. It is shaped like an umbrella, but its main role is ceremonial. Over time, the umbrellino became associated with papal dignity and with churches holding the title of basilica. Traditional examples often have alternating panels of red and gold or red and yellow. These strong bands of color radiate outward from the top of the frame. A finial may rise above them, while a long pole supports the entire object. Unlike a street umbrella, which is opened against the weather or folded away when no longer needed, an umbrellino may be displayed partially open. In this position, it is not intended to cover a person fully. Its partly open form serves as a sign, recognizable within the ceremonial setting of a church. In a basilica, it may stand near other symbols of status and connection to the papacy. Its red and gold fabric rests around the ribs, neither fully raised nor entirely closed. It is less a tool waiting for rain than an emblem made in the shape of shelter. Here again, the umbrella form carries a meaning older and broader than any single institution. The space beneath the canopy is protected space. The person or object beneath it is worthy of attention. Even when the canopy is not fully opened, the possibility of shelter remains part of its visual message. Across Asia, ceremonial parasols continued to express related ideas of kingship and holiness. In royal courts and religious settings, parasols could be carried above rulers, images, relics, or teachers. Some were arranged in tiers with one circular shade rising above another. Others were edged with fringe or decorated with finials, streamers, and patterned cloth. Their forms differed widely, as did the beliefs and ceremonies surrounding them. It would be too simple to say that every ceremonial parasol descended through one uninterrupted chain from a single ancient original. Similar forms may arise because people share similar practical needs. Sunlight falls across every open courtyard. Rain reaches roads used by processions. A raised covering is a natural way to provide shelter, and once it is placed above an important person or object, it can easily become a sign of importance. Cultural exchange mattered as well. Objects, designs, and customs traveled between regions. They could be observed, remembered, adapted, and made anew. Yet each society gave the canopy meanings suited to its own traditions. A resemblance may suggest cultural exchange, shared practical needs, or some measure of both. It does not always reveal one certain path of descent. What remained remarkably consistent was the visual logic. A canopy gathers attention. It creates a small center within a larger space. In a crowded procession, it can be seen from a distance, rising above heads and moving at the calm pace of those carrying it. In a hall, it gives heightened definition to a throne. Above an altar, it suggests a chamber within a chamber, a place of particular stillness beneath a higher roof. The craft of these canopies could be as meaningful as their placement. Weavers prepared fine cloth, embroiderers added decorative or sacred emblems. Woodworkers shaped poles and handles, while metal workers made fittings that joined one part to another. Fringes were knotted along the edges, and tassels hung at the corners. Every material contributed to the appearance and gentle movement of the finished object. When carried outdoors, the cloth responded softly to the air. A corner lifted, a fringe stirred, and polished poles shifted in time with the footsteps below. Within stone buildings, candlelight rested upon embroidery and gilded details. The canopy seemed substantial and light at once. It was a roof, yet a roof made portable by human hands. Meanwhile, the mechanical umbrella remained near the edges of this story in much of medieval Western Europe. Umbrellas had not disappeared from every part of Europe, and knowledge of portable shades survived in various forms. Beyond Western Europe, living traditions continued as well. But in medieval courts and churches, the clearest continuity was often not an everyday implement for rain. It was the enduring language of honor expressed through an overhead covering. For a while, then, we may pause beneath this high ceremonial roof. Around us are candlelight, embroidery, polished poles, and fringed fabric. The pace is slow. The canopy advances beneath an arch, marking a quiet center within the procession. It shelters, distinguishes, and honors. In time, this language of ceremony would meet changing habits of travel, trade, art, and fashion. The grand canopy would remain above thrones, altars, and processions. Beside it, however, a lighter and more personal form would begin to open. And so, from beneath embroidered cloth and through a line of quiet arches, the story steps gently into the open air of early modern Europe. There, among gardens and carriages, painted scenes and fashionable walks, the personal parasol waits to become visible once again. Chapter 7: Renaissance Europe and the Return of the Parasol. The personal parasol opens beneath a mild European sun. Above it, a small canopy of silk catches the light. Below, a gravel path curves between clipped hedges, quiet flower beds, and carefully tended herbs. The person carrying the parasol walks slowly, pausing now and then to look toward a fountain or a distant row of trees. A polished wooden shaft rests lightly against one shoulder. Around the edge of the canopy, a narrow fringe moves in the breeze. This is not yet the familiar umbrella of crowded, rain-darkened streets. It is lighter and more delicate, intended mainly to create a circle of shade. Yet it belongs to the same long family of portable shelters that had appeared in many forms across ancient and medieval societies. To say that Renaissance Europe rediscovered the parasol is convenient, but not quite exact. Portable shades had not simply vanished everywhere and then returned without warning. Umbrellas and parasols remained part of living traditions in the Ottoman world, Persia, India, China, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere. Europeans encountered those traditions through travel, diplomacy, trade, written descriptions, works of art, imported objects, and meetings with people who used them. Within Europe itself, the idea of an overhead canopy had also endured in courts, churches, and ceremonial processions. As we saw in the previous chapter, a canopy could express dignity, sacred importance, or royal authority. What changed during the 16th and 17th centuries was not a sudden invention. It was a gradual increase in the visibility of a smaller, more personal object. The portable parasol began appearing more often in European writing, collecting, art, and fashion. It moved slowly from the margins of observation toward the gardens, promenades, carriages, and courtly spaces of affluent life. This change followed broad currents of contact. Ships crossed seas carrying textiles, ceramics, spices, lacquerware, metalwork, and unfamiliar designs. Merchants and travelers returned with descriptions of distant streets and courts. Diplomats saw canopies carried above rulers and important figures. Artists studied clothing, customs, and accessories. Collectors gathered objects that seemed finely made, useful, or unusual. No single route explains the development of the European parasol. Ideas traveled in several directions, changing along the way. An imported object might be admired, copied, simplified, or transformed. European craftspeople did not merely reproduce what they saw. They adapted portable shades to familiar materials, local fashions, and the wishes of their customers. Italy was especially important in this early modern development. Italian cities were connected to broad networks of Mediterranean commerce. Their courts and workshops were also known for fine textiles, decorative woodwork, and carefully designed accessories. Around the beginning of the 17th century, the word umbrella entered English through Italian forms. The word was associated with shade, which suited the object's most visible European purpose at the time. In these early settings, the umbrella was often understood first as a sunshade. The later distinction between an umbrella for rain and a parasol for sunlight was not always firmly established. Names and purposes could overlap. Even so, the fashionable object opening in an early modern garden was generally meant to soften the sunlight, not to endure a long walk through persistent rain. France also became important in shaping the parasol as an elegant personal accessory. Courtly fashions could travel through portraits, visitors, dressmakers, merchants, and the careful imitation of admired styles. A parasol seen in one aristocratic setting might soon appear in another, changed in color, fabric, or ornament to suit a different taste. Still, we should not place the fully developed parasol culture of the 18th century too early. During the Renaissance, and through much of the 17th century, the personal parasol remained relatively unusual. It attracted attention partly because it was not yet an everyday possession. As the 17th century moved gradually toward the 18th, however, parasols became more visible in fashionable European life. Their appearance suited changing habits of public leisure. Gardens were arranged not only for growing plants, but also for walking, conversation, and display. Gravel paths led beneath open skies, across terraces, and around ornamental pools. Promenades offered places to stroll while seeing and being seen. Carriages carried affluent travelers between houses, parks, courts, and social gatherings. At a carriage door, a parasol could open with a small, practiced motion. It sheltered its bearer during the passage from the shaded interior of the carriage to a bright entrance. On a garden path, it filtered the light without hiding the view. In a courtly setting, it became part of the arrangement of clothing, posture, gesture, and color. These parasols were especially associated with affluent women. Their use reflected practical concerns, but it also reflected the social standards of the period. In wealthy European circles, a pale complexion was often treated as a sign of refinement. It could suggest that a person did not spend long hours working outdoors beneath the sun. Standards of beauty are never timeless or universal. They change from one society and period to another. Yet within these particular circles, the parasol carried a quiet message about class. It provided shade, and the shade itself became part of fashionable appearance. The canopy helped protect the face and hands from strong sunlight. It could also shield costly clothing from fading. Silk, embroidery, delicate dyes, and decorative trims represented considerable expense and patient labor. A small area of shade could help preserve both complexion and cloth. The canopy might be made from silk or another fine textile. Pale fabric created a gentle, luminous shelter. Colored silk added another element to an ensemble, complementing a gown, ribbon, glove, or hat. Light passing through the material softened the brightness beneath it, and sometimes cast a faint wash of color across sleeves and skin. Along the edge there might be a fringe, a line of lace, or small tassels that stirred with every step. Some covers carried painted decoration. The central shaft could be made from wood, while the handle might be polished, carved, or carefully shaped. Even the ornamental tip at the top of the canopy could receive attention from the maker. These details made the parasol more than a simple tool. It belonged to the language of accessories, alongside fans, gloves, ribbons, walking sticks, and small bags. How it was carried mattered almost as much as how it worked. It could be held upright, tilted toward the sun, rested against the shoulder, or closed and carried by its decorative handle. On a long garden path, the angle might change as the sun moved between branches and open sky. Near a fountain, scattered droplets could touch the silk and vanish. At the entrance to a carriage, the canopy folded down, bringing fringe, fabric, and ribs together around the wooden shaft. Many early fashionable parasols were smaller than modern umbrellas. Their canopies offered a modest circle of shade, rather than broad protection for the whole body. They were well suited to a calm promenade, a short walk across a terrace, or the space between a carriage and a doorway. Their materials also limited their usefulness in wet weather. The ribs and covering could be too delicate for rough use. Fine silk might spot, sag, or lose its finish in persistent rain. Lace and fringe could absorb water. Tassels that moved lightly in warm air could become heavy when soaked. For the moment, these limitations did not diminish the parasol's appeal. Its purpose was particular rather than universal. It belonged to selected hours and selected places. It was most often carried by people who could afford an object devoted largely to shade, fashion, and appearance. And so it remained for a time, beneath the measured sunlight of the garden. Its pale or colored canopy moved beside hedges and fountains. Its polished handle rested against a gloved hand. It opened beside carriage doors and closed beneath covered entrances. It accompanied conversation, leisure, and the quiet performance of fashionable life. Yet practical questions were gathering around it. Europe was not a landscape of garden sunlight alone. Carriage wheels crossed damp roads, water collected between paving stones, mist settled over rivers, and rain darkened cloaks, hats, and stone walls. Beyond the sheltered court and the carefully arranged promenade lay shop fronts, bridges, narrow lanes, and busy city streets. A person who carried a small roof against the sun might naturally wonder whether a sturdier version could also shelter against water. The answer would require changes in both custom and construction. A rain umbrella needed a covering that could resist moisture. Its frame had to survive repeated opening and closing, and needed to pass through narrow doorways and crowded streets, rather than remaining within spacious terraces and gardens. Above all, it had to become useful beyond the limited world of courtly fashion. For now, the silk parasol remains open above the gravel path. Sunlight falls through leaves and glances across its polished wooden handle. The fringe shifts gently as the bearer walks toward the gate. Nearby a carriage waits, its wheels resting on stone. Beyond the garden wall, the sky has begun to turn a soft gray. The parasol closes as its bearer steps inside the carriage. Silk gathers around the shaft. The carved handle comes to rest beside the door. Then the carriage moves away, rolling beyond the clipped hedges and the quiet fountain. Somewhere farther along the road, another canopy opens. It is carried away from the garden and toward the city, where paving stones shine beneath steady rain. There, among shops, bridges, carriage wheels, and wet streets, the elegant sunshade is about to take on a more practical purpose. Chapter 8. The umbrella arrives on rainy streets. Beyond the garden wall, rain settles gently over the city. It darkens the roofs, gathers along window ledges, and makes the paving stones shine beneath the muted afternoon sky. Carriage wheels leave tracks through shallow puddles. Pedestrians draw cloaks around their shoulders or pause beneath projecting eaves, waiting to see whether the shower will pass. Among them, here and there, appears a small roof carried by hand. The umbrella was already known in Europe by the beginning of the 18th century. It had not arrived suddenly, nor had any one European invented it. Travelers, merchants, artists, and diplomats had encountered parasols and rain-resistant canopies elsewhere in the world. Portable shades had also become familiar in European courts and gardens. What was changing was not the basic idea, but the object's place in daily life. To belong on a wet city street, an umbrella had to be reasonably portable. It needed to open without too much difficulty, close when its owner entered a house or shop, and fit inside a carriage, hallway, or crowded room. These requirements sound modest, yet early European rain umbrellas could be heavy, expensive, and awkward. A person might remain dry overhead while becoming very aware of the weight carried in one hand. In Paris, a maker named Jean Marius turned his attention to this problem. On the first day of January in 1710, Marius received a 5-year royal privilege for a folding pocket parasol umbrella. The privilege temporarily protected the commercial use of his design. It was not a declaration that he had created the first folding umbrella in world history. Folding and collapsible canopies had much older histories elsewhere. Marius's achievement was more particular. He devised a lightweight portable form suited to the fashions and practical needs of early 18th century Europe. Surviving umbrellas made according to the Marius system reveal careful ingenuity. Their silk canopies were supported by 8 hinged metal ribs. At the center was a telescoping rod, with one section sliding within another, so the shaft became shorter when the umbrella was closed. A wooden handle provided a comfortable grip. When folded, the device was easier to carry than many other European umbrellas of its time. This mattered because an umbrella spends much of its life waiting. It waits beside a door, inside a carriage, or against the wall of an entry hall. Only when the clouds release their rain does it unfold into its full purpose. One early admirer was the Princess Palatine, a prominent member of the French royal family. In a letter written in 1712, she praised the device as convenient to carry in case of rain. Her observation captures one of the umbrella's enduring virtues. It need not be raining when a person leaves home. The umbrella can travel closed and quiet, prepared for weather that may or may not arrive. The silk canopy still required care. Silk was elegant and light, but not ordinary or inexpensive. The hinges and sliding parts had to work smoothly. The owner of a Marius umbrella carried not merely a covering, but a small piece of precision craftsmanship. Marius's royal privilege expired in 1715. Afterward, other makers could produce similar designs. Ideas passed between workshops. A useful hinge might be copied or strengthened. A handle could be carved into another shape. A canopy might be sewn from differently arranged panels. Through this gradual exchange, the umbrella became less of a curiosity and more of a recognizable article for sale. Across the Channel, umbrellas were known in Britain before the middle of the 18th century. An English dictionary published in 1708 described an umbrella as a screen commonly used by women against rain. The definition is brief but revealing. The umbrella's rain-sheltering purpose was understood, and its use was associated particularly with women. Customs of dress often influence whether a useful object is accepted. Parasols had long been linked in Europe with women's fashion and protection from sunlight. A woman carrying a canopy might attract little surprise. A man doing the same could be judged differently, though the rain fell equally upon everyone. This helps explain the lasting fame of Jonas Hanway. Hanway, who lived from 1712 to 1786, worked as a merchant, wrote on public questions, and supported philanthropic causes. Yet one of the simplest details of his life became the most familiar. He habitually carried an umbrella through London. Tradition places the beginning of this habit around the 1750s. Hanway is sometimes called the inventor of the umbrella, but he was not. He is also described as the first man in Britain to use one, though that claim is too certain for the available evidence. Umbrellas have been known in Britain for decades, and it is difficult to prove who first carried one. Hanway's importance lies instead in popularization. He became a memorable example of a British man who used an umbrella regularly and openly. By repeating the habit, he helped make it seem less unusual. Later stories say that Hanway endured jokes and hostility while walking beneath his umbrella. Coach drivers are sometimes given a special role in these tales. Their business benefited when rain persuaded pedestrians to hire covered transport, so an umbrella could be seen as a small competitor. The broad idea is credible. Male umbrella use was unusual enough to attract notice. Yet the most colorful accounts of insults, splashed mud, or direct attacks come from later retellings and are best approached cautiously. History sometimes preserves a quiet change by wrapping it in a noisy anecdote. We may instead picture Hanway on an ordinary London street. Rain rests upon the tiled roofs and runs through channels beside the road. His umbrella is probably heavier than a modern one. Its shaft occupies one hand, and its broad canopy requires care near shop signs, doorways, and other pedestrians. It does not spring open at the press of a button. Carrying it is practical, though not effortless. Perhaps someone turns to look. Perhaps another passerby notices that the umbrella's owner is comparatively dry. The thought need not be spoken. A habit can spread through observation alone. Early rain umbrellas still had obstacles to overcome. Their materials could be costly, and their frames were often bulky. Wet fabric needed room to dry, while a dripping canopy brought a little piece of the street indoors. Leaning in an entry hall, it might brush a wall or leave a small puddle on the floorboards. Yet these mild inconveniences were balanced by a clear advantage. An umbrella allowed a person to walk rather than wait. It offered independence from covered transport and reduced the need to hurry between sheltered places. It transformed uncertain weather from a barrier into a condition that could be managed. A pedestrian no longer had to remain beneath an awning watching the rain. A visitor could arrive with less concern for a damp cloak. A shopper could continue along the street while droplets sounded softly against the canopy overhead. By the late 18th century, umbrellas were becoming more common in London and Paris. No single moment marked their acceptance. There was no morning when every resident opened an umbrella at once. The change appeared gradually, through one damp journey after another. A fashionable device was copied by another workshop. A customer saw one in a window. A man who had considered an umbrella peculiar borrowed one and discovered its usefulness. A household acquired a canopy that passed among several family members. Umbrellas began to gather near doors, their folded covers still carrying beads of rain. As their numbers increased, the umbrella slowly lost some of its older associations with ceremony and rank. It could still be elegant. A fine silk canopy and polished wooden handle remained signs of taste and expense, but usefulness was becoming equally important. Above the street, the umbrella was no longer only a symbol or a fashionable shade, it was shelter. On a rainy evening, the evidence stood quietly in entrance halls. One umbrella rested against the paneling of a Parisian house, its telescoping rod shortened, and its silk folded around 8 metal ribs. Another leaned near the door of a London shop, heavier and less refined, but ready for the journey home. Outside, the streets continued to glisten. Canopies passed beneath hanging shop signs, opening at doorways and closing under sheltered entrances. Silk rustled, hinges moved, wooden handles settled into waiting hands. As more umbrellas traveled along damp pavements, attention turned naturally toward the people who made them. Every canopy depended upon measured silk panels, balanced ribs, a straight shaft, a reliable catch, and joints able to move repeatedly. Behind each umbrella stood patient hands, metal workers shaping ribs, wood turners preparing shafts, seamstresses joining panels, and craftspeople carving and polishing handles. Assemblers, sellers, and repairers also contributed to the finished object's life. And so while rain continues over the city, we may pause beneath a shop awning and look through the window. Inside lies an unfinished umbrella. Its fabric has not yet been stretched, and its ribs rest folded beside a smooth wooden shaft. Nearby, small catches and joints wait to be fitted into place. Soon the separate pieces will be joined. Before following the finished umbrella back into the street, it is time to enter the workshop and watch how such a small portable roof was made. Chapter 9. Workshops, Whalebone and Silk. Beyond the rain-darkened window, the umbrella workshop is warm and orderly. A lamp casts a mellow circle across the workbench. Fine curls of wood rest beside a small plane, while folded lengths of silk wait in a cabinet, protected from dust. Along one wall hang awls, scissors, files, pliers, and narrow-bladed knives. Each tool has its purpose, and each part of the unfinished umbrella will pass through practiced hands before it is ready for the street. An umbrella may appear simple when seen from above. There is a rounded covering, a central stick, and a handle. Yet beneath the fabric is a small piece of careful engineering. Its parts must be light enough to carry, flexible enough to open and close, and strong enough to hold their shape. The covering is called the canopy. In different times and places, canopies were made from silk, cotton, paper, or cloth treated with oil or wax. Silk was valued for its lightness and elegance, although it could be expensive. Oiled cloth was generally heavier, but its treated surface helped rain gather into drops and roll away. To make the canopy, a worker began by cutting wedge-shaped sections known as gores, panels. Laid flat upon the table, each one resembled a long, narrow slice of a circle. Their dimensions had to be consistent. If one panel was too wide or too short, The finished covering might sag on one side or pull too tightly on another. A pattern guided the shears. The maker placed it upon the cloth, considered the direction of the weave, and cut with long, even movements. The panels were then sewn edge to edge with small, regular stitches. Slowly, the separate wedges became a broad, circular form, still soft and flat, waiting for the framework that would lift it. That framework began with the shaft, also called the stick. This was the central pole running from the handle toward the top of the umbrella. Traditional shafts were shaped from woods such as ash, oak, and maple, as well as cane and other materials available to local craftspeople. A good shaft needed to be straight and resilient. It might be cut, seasoned, turned on a lathe, scraped smooth, and polished until it rested comfortably in the hand. Around the shaft moved the runner, a sliding ring or collar. When pushed upward, the runner opened the umbrella. When drawn downward, it allowed the frame to fold. A catch held it in position. This familiar movement, now performed almost without thought, depended upon careful fitting. A runner that was too tight would resist the hand. One that was too loose might rattle or fail to remain steady. The long, flexible pieces spreading outward beneath the canopy are the ribs. Between the ribs and the runner are shorter supports called stretchers. As the runner rises, the stretchers press outward upon the ribs, lifting the canopy into its curved form. And shaft work together like a quiet mechanical flower, opening through linked movement instead of unfolding petals. For centuries, umbrella makers searched for rib materials that combined strength with flexibility. Wood, cane, and metal were all used. Another historic material was commonly called whalebone, although the name is misleading. It was not bone, but baleen, the flexible filtering material found in the mouths of certain whales. Baleen could be split and shaped into slender strips. Its springiness made it useful for umbrella and parasol ribs, as well as for stays in clothing and other manufactured objects. These objects belonged to a period when animal materials were widely used in craft and trade. Their use came at a severe cost to whale populations, especially as commercial whaling expanded. Today, protections for whales and the availability of other materials have made baleen an inappropriate and generally unavailable choice for new umbrellas. Steel, aluminum, fiberglass, and other modern substances now perform the work once assigned to it. In a museum collection, an antique umbrella, or an old repair shop, however, a strip of baleen may still reveal how earlier makers approached the difficult problem of creating a frame that could bend without immediately breaking. It is evidence of historic craftsmanship, and also of the consequences carried by some historic materials. At the end of each rib sat a small fitting known as a tip. The canopy could be secured to these tips, keeping the cloth spread evenly around the frame. At the center, the panels met around the crown of the umbrella. A protective fitting called a ferrule might cap the point at the top, or protect the lower end of the shaft, depending on the usage followed by a particular maker or trade. Even the smallest fitting mattered. A rough edge might catch the fabric. A weak joint might loosen after repeated use. A crooked rib could disturb the balance of the entire canopy. The assembler therefore opened and closed the bare frame several times, listening for a scrape and watching to see whether the ribs moved together. When the frame was judged sound, the sewn canopy was lowered over it and carefully aligned. Each seam usually followed a rib. The fabric was attached at the center, along selected points beneath the canopy and at the tips. Its tension had to be balanced. Too little tension, and rainwater might settle in shallow pockets. Too much, and the seams would remain under strain. The handle offered another field for craftsmanship. It might be straight, knobbed, crooked like a shepherd's crook, or fitted with a loop. A woodworker could carve it by hand, turn it into a rounded form, bend cane with heat and moisture, wrap it with cord or leather, or mount it with metal. Some handles were plain and practical. With years of use, their surfaces became polished by the palms that carried them. Others displayed wealth through silver fittings, horn, ivory, or elaborate carving. A handle could be decorative, but it also needed to feel balanced. It was the part of the umbrella that remained in constant contact with its owner, resting against the hand through every damp walk. As with baleen, some luxury materials require careful reflection. Historic ivory was obtained from animals, especially elephants, and its trade contributed to lasting harm. Horn also came from animals, although its sources and methods varied. Such materials may be encountered on preserved antiques, where they help explain the tastes, commerce, and choices of an earlier age. Their presence is part of an object's history, not a recommendation for continued use. Modern makers can create handsome handles from responsibly sourced wood, recycled metals, and durable manufactured materials without repeating those practices. Once assembled, the umbrella was inspected as a whole. The maker held the handle, raised the runner, and watched the silk canopy become taut. The open umbrella might be turned slowly as each panel, rib, tip, and seam was examined. Perhaps it was held beneath a gentle stream of water to test the covering. Drops gathered on the treated surface, joined one another, and traveled toward the edge. Any leak could then be marked for attention. The work did not end when the umbrella left the shop. Repairers replaced broken tips, patched torn panels, straightened shafts, renewed catches, and fitted fresh ribs. Because a traditional umbrella represented costly materials and many hours of skilled labor, an owner was more likely to have it mended than to discard it. Repair shops became places where old umbrellas returned in altered condition. Silk had faded in daylight, handles had grown smooth beneath familiar palms, ferrules had worn down through repeated contact with the pavement. A fastening might have loosened, or a stretcher might no longer push its rib into the proper position. A repairer learned to read these signs. A tear beside a seam suggested one kind of strain, while a loose stretcher suggested another. Sometimes a single damaged panel could be removed and replaced. Sometimes a usable canopy could be transferred to a sounder frame. The aim was not always to make an umbrella appear new. It was to restore its balance, allowing it to open smoothly and provide shelter once again. In this way, one umbrella gathered the work of many trades. A metal worker formed joints and catches. A wood turner shaped the shaft. A seamstress joined the gores. A carver prepared the handle. An assembler brought the separate pieces together, while a repairer prolonged their useful life. Each craftsperson understood only part of the object, yet all those parts had to agree. The canopy had to match the frame, the runner had to move freely along the shaft, the stretchers had to lift the ribs by equal degrees, the handle needed to sit securely beneath the whole structure. No single detail was grand, but together they created a dependable little roof. At last, the finished umbrella stands near the workshop door. Its silk is folded into neat sections around the ribs. A narrow band holds the canopy closed, and the curved handle catches the lamplight. Outside, rain continues to trace silver lines through the evening air. The shopkeeper lifts the umbrella and opens it once more. The runner slides upward. The stretchers extend, and the ribs rise together. What had seemed to be a slender bundle becomes a measured circle of shelter. Soon, lighter metals and factory machinery will alter nearly every part of this familiar object. Production will quicken, and umbrellas will become available to more people in expanding towns and cities. Yet here, for a little longer, the umbrella remains the product of patient hands. It has been cut, shaped, sewn, fitted, opened, tested, and carefully closed. Then the workshop door swings inward. Cool air carries the faint scent of rain across the warm room. The finished umbrella passes into a waiting hand, opens beneath the evening sky, and moves away along the shining street.